Hello and welcome to today's webinar, AI from the Front Lines. This webinar is part of the AI Accelerate webinar series. This is episode 1, so look forward to more invitations to this webinar series in your email inbox. Today's event is brought to you by Hewlett Packard Enterprise and Intel and produced by Actual Tech Media. Before we get started, there's just a little bit of housekeeping we first need to do. My name is David Davis, and I'm excited to be moderating this really cool event we've got lined up for you today. So I'm really looking forward to it. I hope that you are as well. Before we get started, I want to call your attention to the handouts box that's there in your GoToWebinar control panel. It's there that you'll find 4 handouts that have been selected by today's presenters. You'll find the 451 Research Guide to Enterprise AI. You'll find the Accelerating AI Initiatives with HPE and Blue Data report from ESG. You'll find a really cool infographic on HPE High Performance Solutions with Intel Technology. And finally, you can download the full Deep Learning for Dummies guide. So make sure you go ahead and download those handouts now, because after the event, you won't have access to those resources. So you can just click and download those now and check them out after the webinar. Now, I also want to point out that we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event today. If you'd like to make that donation to charity, we would love to help you do that. Full price terms and conditions can be found at our website, events.actualtechmedia.com. And that gift card is being awarded by Actual Tech Media. And then finally, I want to point out that we want this to be an educational webinar. That's the point of today's event, to help you to learn about artificial intelligence in the enterprise, how you can enable it, help you to get all your questions answered. I mean, this is a real cutting edge topic, so I'm betting there's going to be a lot of questions on today's event. So feel free to use that GoToWebinar control panel there, and specifically the questions box to ask your questions during the event. We'll be doing our best to answer those questions during the event. We'll be doing some dedicated Q&A at the end of the event. And if there's any questions we don't get to, we'll do our best to get to those after the event has concluded. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's presenters. On the panel discussion today, you'll be hearing from Mr. Manoj Suvarna, who's a business leader in high-performance computing and AI at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. You'll hear from Mr. Matt McCaw, Global Field CTO at HPE and the Container Platform. And finally, you'll hear from Monica Livingston, who is an AI Sales Director for Americas and EMEA at Intel. Manoj, Matt, and Monica, thank you so much for being on today's event. We are going to have a fun discussion here about AI from the front lines. And now, before we kick off our first topic, I'd like to just bring up a poll question for the audience. This is our first of 2 poll questions. And so you should see that poll question coming up on the screen. And the question is, do you currently have any influence or decision-making ability for IT purchases, including AI, within your organization? So I'll leave that question up here for just a moment, and it's a multiple choice question. It should be pretty easy to answer. And while we leave it up, Manoj, I had a question for you. I wanted to first ask you, I mean, when it comes to implementing AI in enterprises today, where do you see that, kind of getting started? What's the entry point? Is it from the bottom up, or is it from the top down?
Yeah, thanks, David, for the question. So in most of the organizations, what we have seen is a lot of the AI push is really coming from tops down. It is essentially the C-suite that are introducing AI or would like to be, more in kind of the top of mind from an IT perspective, also from a business perspective, and then even the line of businesses, right? So the heads of departments, whether it is from sales or marketing, supply chain, variety of different groups are coming in and really driving that momentum because the industry is moving in that direction. So I would say it's certainly coming from the top.
Okay, that's very insightful. Good to know. And thank you to everyone who answered that poll question. And with that, I want to first hand it over back to Manoj. Manoj, why don't you share with the audience, what this webinar is all about and what really prompted you to launch this series on AI in the enterprise?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for hosting us. So, AI is among the top three priorities for most CIOs today. And, in fact, there was a recent study that was published by Gartner, which mentioned the fact that the adoption of AI has increased significantly, almost about 3x over the past 4 years that they've been doing this study. Now, there's certainly a lot of hype around AI, but there are also numerous examples where AI is making big impacts. Things like autonomous driving or self-checkouts or virtual assistants. And the fact is that vast majority of the customers are really in the early stages of adoption. So when you look at the slide, what we have captured is basically an overall grouping segmentation from both our internal research as well as industry research. We noticed that about 15 to 20% of the customers are really in the scaling production AI environment. And when you think about these customers, these are customers that are implementing AI at scale, right? Whether it is checkouts that you do, whether it is all kinds of demand forecasting, whether it's inventory management, customer loyalty marketing, facial recognition analysis for video surveillance. Those are customers that are really in the advanced stage. So that's about 15 to 20% of them. They're looking primarily to scale up and grow more. They obviously have significant change management within the organization. They're also looking at how to balance their skill set because a lot of these processes that were human-driven, are moving towards automation and towards AI, and so they have to reskill their workforce in order to, continue their growth. The next set of customers, is primarily customers that are in the startup stage. So that's about 30% of the segments, the universe that we see. This is where, obviously there is some, CEO and CIO buy-in. They're, kicking the tires, doing some POCs, doing some experimentation. They're also looking at evaluation of, things that they can build, talent that they can hire or bring into the organization, and really trying to prove the value of AI for their business. And then about 50% of the audience, of the target customers are really, trying to evaluate how important is AI to their business, what are some of the use cases, and where do they start. And, David, what's interesting is there was a poll question, I believe, that you had asked when we were registering. And, this audience in particular came back with an overwhelming, almost 2/3 majority indicating that they either have AI today in a pilot or a production phase or plan to implement in the next 6 to 12 months. I think that certainly far exceeds, the numbers that we have seen, which obviously shows there's a lot of interest. Now, to further increase the awareness of AI and debunk, some of the myths associated with that, we decided to launch this webinar series where once a quarter, we will bring you subject matter experts from our partner ecosystem and to share tips and best practices to help you along that journey.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and I love to hear how excited our audience is about AI and how it can help them in their IT organization. And now I'd like to, turn this question over to Monica. Monica, great to have you on the event today. I wanted to ask you, what role is Intel playing when it comes to AI?
Sure, and thank you for having me on today. So what might surprise many people is that because Xeon is the foundation of most of the world's data centers, most AI today runs on Xeon, especially inference. But we're also building an incredibly diverse hardware and software portfolio that is already powering AI from small form factor edge devices with BPUs to massive public clouds. Our customers have achieved success across a range of hardware, anywhere from a massive inference deployment on CPUs across multiple data centers for content recommendation engines, to VPU-based cameras being used to protect endangered species from poachers in real time, and to using FPGAs to provide acceleration for search engines. And we started investing several years ago in making the Xeon CPUs more performant for AI applications, both new hardware features and in generation software optimizations. In fact, our second generation processors that are in market today have a set of instructions that we call Intel Deep Learning Boost that are built in to accelerate AI inference. The third generation Xeon Scalable processors that are coming out this year will add more extensions for accelerated AI training. In addition to adding AI performance to our existing products, we are also investing in acquisitions. We've brought in innovative companies like Movidius and Nirvana to build out what we hope is the industry's most diverse AI hardware offerings. So we can meet every customer from hyperscalers to novices, whether they are small or large, and wherever they are in their AI journey. And as we begin 2020, we've never been more excited about this breadth and depth of our offerings with new products coming out. So our Nirvana neural network processors are coming to market this year. We have new VPU architecture coming to market, as well as I previously mentioned, the third generation Xeon processors are coming to market. And because AI is not one size fits all, we're continuing to make investments in acquisitions. And some of you might have seen our recent announcement in December where we acquired a company called Habana. And finally, we have to keep in mind that acceleration is a system level problem. So you're not going to get the best performance if you just add one additional component. True acceleration requires compute, network, memory, storage, software to all work in harmony to drive that best performance. And this is where Intel really has an advantage of having been a player in all of these different areas over the course of several years. And then, of course, HPE as well brings massive expertise in using our components in system and full solution design. So quite a bit of work in the AI space from us.
Yeah, very exciting. I mean, I'm learning just now about Intel GPUs and ASICs, and so it's really cool to see what Intel's doing in the AI space and what the future's going to look like. Let's move on now to the next question, and that is all around industry examples. Manoj, specifically, what are some of the industry examples where AI is being used today, and how's it really helping real-world companies out there?
Yeah, great question. There used to be a time when some of the initial AI adoption was primarily with companies that have traditionally done high-performance computing, right? Think about, financial services, think about energy or utility environments, think about, large research houses, academics, and also government, and manufacturing to a certain extent. So these are traditional industries that heavily invest in compute and large data centers and large clusters to drive, simulations, whether it's weather simulations, whether it's, genome sizing, a variety of different use cases, or even, Monte Carlo simulations and financials. But I think what we have seen is the adoption of AI, which kind of started from HPC and is now expanding broadly, is going beyond the traditional high-performance computing environments. It's coming up in retail. It's coming up in healthcare. It's also coming up in, some of the traditional state and local government, right, with video surveillance. It's coming up in consumer tech. These are examples like, detecting fraud or, looking at creating more personalized experiences as you check out at the store. It's around image analytics, in healthcare. And also when you think about manufacturing, it's about predictive maintenance or prescriptive maintenance of, where your equipment is about to fail and how you can correct it, to minimize any downtime. So clearly, a variety of industries are adopting it. In fact, I was at a recent event and I noticed that there was an industry trade organization that's primarily looking at using AI to monitor the quality of precious gems, right? Clearly, a unconventional, compute environment that they could be using in order to replace humans with robots and computer vision to really detect the quality. So it has become pervasive, and clearly, the numbers, as I mentioned earlier, we envision, close to about 50% of the customers out there that are either in the early stages of adoption or thinking about implementing AI. But obviously, as this audience is pointing out, that number is significantly higher.
Absolutely, yeah, great examples. Monica, I'm curious, what have you seen over at Intel in the area of industries adopting AI?
Yeah, so if I think we're looking at specific examples or industries, Manoj did a great job summarizing really the applicability of AI, which is quite pervasive. And there are really too many examples to count. One of my, really some of my favorite examples of AI implementation are of unmanned vehicles collecting data in areas where it's difficult for a human worker to be, and then using AI to find defects and analyze and come up with a solution. And an example that I can go into a little bit is Intel is doing work with a customer to restore ancient structures using a combination of drones and AI algorithms to detect the structural flaws and develop a preservation approach, which I find super, super interesting. So these are drones that are taking pictures in areas that are not easily accessible by humans, and the deep learning algorithm detects the structural flaws, helps develop the preservation approach, including even calculating the amount of bricks that are needed for the repair. So these are deep learning networks that execute a series of cascading neural network processing for defect recognition, defect 3D shape generation, brick wall generation, and then the repair scheme generation. And then you can think about being able to take this example and really scaling it to a number of different industries. We have customers that are using a similar process to check for defects in underwater structures like oil rigs, where it's extremely difficult to have human divers go and constantly monitor. And then they have massive amounts of data where the manpower that it would take to analyze that is significant. And what AI allows them to do is access these remote structures, look for defects, come up with preservation solutions or fixes, and then really analyze that data for a significant savings in human hours reviewers.
Wow, that's really cool. Cutting edge stuff. It doesn't get any more cutting edge than that. So very cool examples. Let's move on now to this question, and that is, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest pitfalls that organizations have when diving into AI? And I'm excited to bring in Matt to help answer this. Matt, I know you've worked with a lot of companies out there who are actually implementing AI. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a great question. Executives get really excited when they hear their peers in industry talking about artificial intelligence. And so there's a number of pitfalls or anti-patterns that organizations are taking. And you see sort of a list of them here. Lack of having talent is a really big one. You can't just take the enterprise data warehouse technology and the business intelligence analytics software and make it AI ready. Those are foundational building blocks, both from a technology and a skill set perspective. But to do AI at scale, you need new skills, new resources, new processes, and new software platforms to do that. The other big one in this space is when you hear the buzzword AI, everyone thinks, oh, we've got to go to cloud. The cloud has the best opportunity because it hyperscales. And I think touching on something Monica was saying earlier, that the compute platform is important, and you might get specific or optimized compute platforms in some of the hyperscale cloud providers, but you have to ask, well, where's your data? Yes, it might be convenient to spin up an AI development environment in one of the public clouds, but what if your data's not there? How do you get your data there? How do you ensure that the data, once it's there, is secure and following the compliance regulations of your particular region or industry? So these are really, really complex problems to solve. And so we see these anti-patterns or pitfalls come up all over the place. And I think the answer to this for many organizations is they've got to be really thoughtful about this. They've got to take a step back and look at a few things. With the unprecedented volumes of data, how are we going to manage and ensure we're in compliance with that? How are we going to then serve up that data and make it available without getting out of compliance, without creating an even bigger mess for IT to clean up? Because at the end of the day, IT's still going to manage some public cloud instance. So we can't just replicate what we were doing on premises in the public cloud. We need to think about doing things a little differently. And then lastly, okay, so we've done a bunch of AI development. How do we actually operationalize that in a way that's going to affect the business? I saw a study recently that showed that over 86% of organizations are struggling with the operationalization of AI initiatives. That means that 86% of the data science projects, the AI initiatives, never make it to production. And that is a really, really high failure rate. And that's because all of these things leading up to it are adding complexity and difficulty for these organizations. So again, we got to take a step back. We got to be thoughtful about this. We need to work on reskilling our workforce. We got to think about new infrastructure paradigms to put the right workload on the right infrastructure at the right time, and then apply those skills and software to these business problems.
Yeah, great advice, Matt. So people are struggling to find the right talent, complexity, from the viewpoint of you at HPE, Matt. Monica, I'm interested to find out, what have you seen? What are some of the biggest pitfalls from your perspective at Intel?
Yeah, so I think Matt did a great job speaking to the most common pitfalls in AI adoption. And I'd like to just look at the model that we normally use when we talk to companies. And we call it the 4Ds of AI. It's discovery, data, develop, and deploy. Discover is a big step in the process that many times gets shortchanged, but planning is extremely important. So in this first step, you define what problems you're trying to solve, and then you discuss the best way to solve them. And that could be through traditional analytics software or something more machine assisted like AI. It also includes taking stock of the various in-house talent. And I know Matt touched on that, whether you have sufficient data science skills in-house or whether you need to supplement. And then also evaluating any potential ethical, legal, or privacy concerns that you need to keep in mind along the way. In the data step, as I mentioned, a lack of data readiness is the most common barrier slowing AI innovation. And we see that with customers all the time today, where they come and they try to use AI, but they don't have sufficient data to train. So taking the time to clean and normalize data, and then explore ways to potentially supplement what you have with existing data lakes available from other companies will make or break your model's success. And I'll also point out that the AI industry is just such a supportive community. And there are a lot of resources online today that are free to use. There's open source code, there are data repositories, there are pre-trained models. And this is a great source to potentially augment your data from if that fits your particular need. And then you move on to the develop stage, and this is also known as the model step. This is where you rely on your data science team to explore the techniques and methods that lead to an algorithm that gets the results that you want, and then set up the infrastructure to support your specific training and deployment. This process can take months. In fact, we've seen it take anywhere from 6 months to a year to actually get a working proof of concept. So what's key here is to be prepared to work through multiple iterations as parameters get trained, and to also prepare the organization that this step is not going to be fast. So when you're setting up your milestones, it's very important to make sure you're taking your time here. And then finally, you have the deploy step. And this is when you have a trained model and you're looking at how to deploy it as well as maintain it. What infrastructure do you need for inference? What infrastructure do you need for maintenance? Models will decay over time. How often do you need to retrain those models is going to dictate the sort of infrastructure that you need, and also how do you retain version control and things like that. So this step is extremely important. You're not just deploying and being done. So these are the steps that we usually walk customers through and make sure that you have sufficient planning at each step. But again, even though these AI deployments are not trivial, the community is extremely supportive and collaborative. So there is quite a bit of support for those who are ready to get started.
Excellent, excellent. So training, infrastructure, planning are all very critical. Great advice. Let's move on to the next question here, and that is, do customers need to invest in GPUs and specialized equipment to start an AI project? Monica, back to you.
So not necessarily. While many companies in the foreseeable future will use some sort of machine learning applications, today, other than hyperscalers, a handful of leading enterprises and research institutions, very few companies are ready for or need acceleration of any kind for deep learning, which is why we always work with customers to accelerate with purpose. AI workloads should be tested on existing infrastructure first to evaluate whether specialized equipment is really needed. In our latest Intel Xeon CPUs, you might actually find the performance you need while maintaining your existing infrastructure during your regular data center upgrade. And then from there, the range of applications and environments in which AI will improve business processes and consumer experiences is just so diverse. Solutions used in liquid-cooled data centers are very different than those used on CubeSat satellites in space, for example. So there is no single architecture, chip, or form factor qualified to serve all the needs. There are critical factors like data readiness, expertise, use case that need to be considered in determining the right solution. And Intel is one of the few major technology companies that are offering a breadth of components for AI, like CPUs. We'll soon have GPUs. We have VPUs in the market, as well as purpose-built ASICs and FPGAs. So with each architecture serving unique customer needs, infrastructure architects can choose what they need to support any AI application.
Excellent, excellent. And Manoj, what's your take at HPE? Do customers need to invest in specialized equipment for AI?
Yeah, so I think, as Monica pointed out, it really depends on the customer use case, in terms of the environments that they currently have. As I mentioned earlier, there are some customers that are running data centers today for the high-performance computing environments. Certainly an extension to those is, some of the AI use cases that they can leverage. And then there are others that are coming in, with new use cases and probably starting small and gradually, building it up. So it really depends from customer to customer and the type of, environment and the stage they are in their AI journey, right? Whether they're in the early pilot stage, where they're just kicking the tires, probably need a small environment, to do some modeling and some testing, or if they are in, past their pilot stage and really expanding it to more of an enterprise-wide data center.
Okay, that sounds great. There's a lot of flexibility, a lot of options. And speaking of that, I'm sure you get this question quite often, and that is, are there any special starter kits or bundles so that customers can get started with AI pilot projects? Manoj?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, we kind of tried to, hit the easy button for, customers that are confused about, hey, should I be using CPUs or GPUs, or, how many CPUs are required, or, what memory is needed. We have things like a deep learning cookbook, that has some pre-tested, validated configurations. And we have taken that a step further where, we have introduced some, early, training environments or inference environments that customers can leverage, based on the existing use case that they might have. So a lot of that information is available actually on our website. So if you can click on, hpe.com, info AI, there's a URL on here, and also Intel has a similar link. We can certainly help, our customers to navigate through the complexity of, the architecture and the type of environment that they would need, to support that. Now, we take that a step further. If you want to move on to the next slide, we take that a step further where, we have, we have a services offering where we have dedicated professionals in the services organization that could take it from a preliminary transformation workshop. We call that an AI workshop, where they would come in, sit down with, our customers and really evaluate, what is their long-term objective for AI, right? How does that tie into a company's objectives? Who the key stakeholders are? How do you bring, multiple different groups and also the data sets associated with those groups in order to drive an AI project? So we can do some of those early discovery and strategy sessions. We can also work with them in the experimentation and the POC stage, and taking it all the way to an implementation phase where we could help them with kind of building out that entire architecture and that end-to-end solution, and really drive them towards more of an operational AI environment. So again, depending on the customer needs and the requirements, we can tailor these services to our customers. And a lot of these services are looking across the end-to-end value chain beyond IT, looking at the lines of businesses and all the data sets that customers may have.
So let's move on now. Let's talk a little bit about, what's the strategic advantage really of the HPE and Intel partnership, Manoj?
Yeah, so I think I would characterize this as, it's a three-pronged strategy that HPE is driving in the market. As a thought leader, what we're trying to drive is, of course, everybody is familiar with HPE as the leading infrastructure vendor, both on-premise as well as in a hybrid cloud environment. What we're trying to drive with this solution is bringing in the best people, the best technology, and the best partners. By people, we have data scientists, we have architects, we have consultants and technologists, including Matt, right, that connect with our customers, that engage with, the C-suite, as well as, the leading IT folks in trying to help them build their, not only their architecture, but also their end-to-end strategy around AI. From a technology perspective, again, we are leading technology providers all the way across the data center. And then, from a partnership perspective, this is where the power of partnership comes in, right? Where Intel is one of our leading strategic partners, among others, that we bring into this ecosystem and really drive that strategic advantage, especially when it relates to, co-innovation and, co-engineering, on all the new platforms that Intel is bringing to the market, and, curating all of this together, delivering it to our customers. That is essentially our key strategic advantage.
Excellent, excellent. So what do you think the key takeaways are from this event, Manoj?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I would say definitely, AI is permeating across all industries. If folks haven't started on this journey, which I don't think it's the case with this audience, I think several of them have already started it. Clearly continue to go down that path, start early, make sure that you focus on some of the small projects first. A lot of times, as Matt pointed out earlier, over 80% of the projects fail to see the light of the day when it goes to production, right? So you don't want to take too much of, emphasis on large, mega scale, groundbreaking projects. Start with a few small use cases and really grow that, prove the value, and then continue to expand it from, one business to another business, one use case to another. And I think the other aspect of it is begin your journey with the right technology partner, right? As Monica pointed out earlier, you don't necessarily have to have certain bits and pieces, to launch AI. We could help you guide along that path because we have hundreds and thousands of customers that we have worked with, beyond AI in terms of the traditional data center, as well as some of the new emerging technologies, when it comes to things like containerization and hybrid cloud. So we can really help you, along that journey. And, you're welcome to download a copy. Again, something, I'm sure the audience may be familiar with, but if not, there's the difference between, within AI, between machine learning and deep learning. Some of the use cases that we talked about kind of transcend between the two, but those are, areas that, our audience and customers should be familiar with, because that is essentially where the industry is moving. And I would welcome Matt and Monica to comment on some of the key takeaways as well.
Yeah, just a quick component here that AI is a heavily used buzzword in industry right now, and I think it's our job as practitioners to help the executives in the companies that we work for really understand what it means to take an AI initiative on. There was a bunch of follow-up questions in the chat about skill set and that sort of thing, and so we can jump into some of those specifically if we have some time here at the end. But I think taking a practical approach to AI and understanding what that term means and what it can do for your industry, I think is probably the most important takeaway here.
Excellent. And Monica, any final takeaways?
Yeah, so I think it's easy to get scared of AI, but there are a lot of different ways to AI. You can build everything in-house, of course, if you have that expertise, have that infrastructure. But there are a lot of third-party companies that are offering ready-made solutions today, and that can even customize solutions for their customers. So I would encourage everybody to take stock of what potentially could be applied to AI and where AI might be useful, and then looking at existing resources within each company, whether it's human capital or infrastructure, to see what's available, but then also looking externally what third-party companies are offering, whether it's software, whether it's hardware as a service offerings, to see how they could potentially complement what exists in-house.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you, everyone. We do have some questions here coming in from the audience. So while we do that, I'm just going to bring up this slide, and there is an email address on there, and I've actually pasted that email address into the chat box for anyone who wants to click on that or copy and paste that and send your questions via email if you think of questions after the event. I also pasted in there the two Intel and HPE URLs for more information, and those are clickable. You can just click on those, and those should open up in your web browser. So now's the time to get into your questions if you have questions about AI. One of the first questions that came in here, Matt, they're asking about if you can elaborate a little bit more about the skill set. Any details you want to share on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the past, when we were doing analytics in the organization, we had a data warehouse and we had a data warehouse admin and architect, and we had an ETL team that spent a lot of time getting data put into the warehouse in a properly structured manner. We then had BI or analysts that would use various tools to run reports, either canned reports or ad hoc reports. And that's how analytics was done in the enterprise. Now into the modern era where we have distributed data storage systems. So some of our data might be sitting in a Hadoop data lake. Some of it might be sitting on a file system. As Monica mentioned, drones are huge. And so those images are usually just put on NFS file systems, or they're dropped in object storage. So I need to have teams of technologists that understand all of that and how to get the data and move it around. We then still need to leverage some of the skill sets from the past around getting the data in, moving the data out, ensuring it's being regulated properly. But then we enter the data scientists, and the data science skill set is different than the analyst skill set in the past. When we talk about doing advanced analytics, data scientists now have less background in traditional query generation and more backgrounds in math, or maths for you international audience folks. And so we have people that have advanced degrees in math writing a little bit of code, but probably not doing a great job writing the code because, again, they have math degrees, not comp sci degrees. Developing algorithms that then have to be operationalized. So I talked about the challenge of operationalization that organizations face. One of the key problems is that taking the output from someone that knows math and getting that to run on a system that might be at the edge. So it might be running in firmware, it might be sitting in a connected car, it might be intelligence in the drone itself. So the math code is very, very different than the computer science code. And so that means that the data scientist needs to work with the computer scientist, a software engineer that knows how to write the code that is going to run in that operational system. And then it has to be governed. There has to be policies around that. And so tying all of those things together in the enterprise is an organizational function that is difficult. So you've got to hire new people, new resources with new skills. And the larger the organization you have, the less likely it's going to be that they all sit in one org, reporting into one executive. So now you've got to work cross-functionally across that, and that's where things really start to break down. So from a skill set perspective, it's about hiring the right people, but then more importantly, getting them to work together as they go through this process of, idea inception to operationalization and then monetization.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Another follow-up question came from the same person here. They're asking about if you can elaborate on what kind of operational changes go into place when you implement AI.
I think he meant challenges. So what are some of the operational challenges with that? And I sort of touched on that a little bit. So, if you look at some of the things around, especially nowadays with containers and Kubernetes, everyone expects that you can just spin up a Kubernetes cluster with your AI application and then you're off to the races. But old software development principles, I think, still hold firm. We need to test our code. We need to write tests about how that algorithm is going to perform. And then we need to make sure that we are properly managing the environment. If you follow any of the threads out there on Kubernetes, the promise of auto scale is what you get with Kubernetes. But if you go Google some of the challenges with Kubernetes, there's some hilarious videos that come up around auto scaling just not working. So there's still no magic button here. And so just to expect the operations team, right? Remember the people that had been running your data warehouse, your Hadoop cluster, your production environment, expecting them to just pick up new technology frameworks like Kubernetes and expect auto scale to work is probably not a good expectation. So again, the people that are writing the code need to work very closely with the teams that are running the code in production so that we can set scaling rules, and we need to monitor that. We need to make sure that, again, we're writing good QA tests so that our code, the math, we're writing tests on the math to make sure that the math executes correctly. But then the last part of this is we need to not just monitor and manage the runtime environment. We need to actually monitor the models themselves, because models decay over time. Let me give you a really sort of simplistic practical example. Let's say we're a bank and we've written a fraud detection algorithm so that credit card transactions are being measured as fraudulent. Well, over time, criminals get smarter. They figure out that your detection algorithms can be worked around, and so over time, your detection becomes less effective. And so you need to be monitoring the efficacy of the math essentially in production. So this is not a code monitoring. This is a algorithm monitoring. Someone needs to be monitoring that and putting thresholds. And that is usually the job of the BI team, right? The people that are reporting on the KPIs for the organization, they need to be monitoring the KPIs of these algorithms and then working back with the data science team to say, hey, this model, it has decayed. It's no longer meeting the KPIs of the organization. And so we've got to get a data scientist back involved. They've got to rehydrate their dev environment. They've got to check to see, retrain the model, bring in new variables, new data sources. This whole process, this life cycle is really challenging because, again, we're bringing in all sorts of disparate roles, right? We've got data scientists, software engineers, data engineers, admins, operations people, BI people that all need to work together to make this AI and deep analytics stuff work. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is the organizational aspect of this. The tech is difficult too, because it's mostly emerging, but it's the organizational stuff that I think is the biggest challenge. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. And in fact, it did. The person responded. That's a great example. So let's see. Excellent Q&A there coming in. Another question that came in: what about containerization when it comes to AI? Can containers help me with implementing AI?
Yeah, well, sort of, I guess. It's kind of a loaded question. So containers make it easy to deploy applications against any infrastructure. So if I have an application that is containerized, in theory, I can run it anywhere. So that's nice. But applications generally, from a data science perspective, aren't the whole story. So if I'm a data scientist, I probably need a notebook like Jupyter. I probably need a programming language like Python, and then I need a bunch of libraries that I'm going to bring in. And so for me to do that, again, if we remember going back to that persona that I talked about, that data scientist who's good at math now has to build a container to do this work. That's an expectation that I don't think is quite accurate. So we've got to get that data scientist working with an IT software engineer, architect, operations person that can help them build that container. But once we've done that, now we can actually spin up these environments, whether they're dev environments or runtime environments, and port them anywhere. And that's really important if the organization's going to be hybrid or multi-cloud. If some of my data sits in GCP as an example, and other data sits in Azure, well, it would be really, really nice if I could port my dev environment across either of those. Containers gives you that availability. And then if we look at the runtime or the operationalization of that, using containers to elastically scale up and scale down gives you that advantage as well. But again, there's got to be a lot of thought. There has to be engineering that has to put into it. There's not an easy button here. So we've got to put the same thought and methodology into deploying these containerized environments as we did the traditional environments.
All right, excellent. Another question that came in here from the audience, and I don't know if you can answer this, but maybe you can give it a shot, and that is, how long does the process take to complete an AI model?
I guess it depends on the complexity of the model and how much data you're working to train against it. I think most data scientists, so most of the time is not spent doing model development. Most time in the research that I've read, the longest pole in the tent is waiting for the infrastructure to be provisioned. Most enterprises, if you had a new data scientist come in and say, I need a brand new dev environment to support this project, it takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months to stand up the infrastructure, get the software loaded, get access to data. Then the data scientist needs to go through all of the data wrangling, so making the data align so that it's actually useful. That takes weeks to months. The actual algorithm development itself usually doesn't take very long, weeks, maybe months. But it iterates. So I spoke to a data scientist at a large UK bank, and she had been working on the same fraud model for 18 months. Now, she worked on it, she pushed it, it got pushed into production. The model decayed a little bit, she went back in. She was constantly revising the fraud model for a large retail bank in the UK. So the initial development, I don't think took very long, but all of that stuff leading up to it took a really long time. And then you've got to keep at it over time as well. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I hope that sort of touched on it.
Yeah, it does. Very cool. Very interesting. 6 to 9 months. That's incredible to wait for the infrastructure. I want to call the audience's attention to this poll question that's on the screen. What additional information would you like on the HPE and Intel AI solution? This is a multi-select question there, so feel free to select multiple answers except for the one that says nothing, the very last one. But hopefully you would like some sort of additional information, perhaps a demo or pricing. Maybe you'd like to try it for yourself. So we'll just leave that up there while we do some additional Q&A. Let's see, another question that came in, they're asking is, what about the cloud? Matt, maybe you can touch on this. Maybe there's some others who would like to contribute as well. Can we not run AI workloads in the cloud?
Sure. Yeah, of course you can. But where's your data? Is your data in the cloud? And so the cloud is really, really good and really useful if your data lives there and you've run out of infrastructure capabilities or capacity on premises. The cloud brings a number of really good APIs for functions, so you don't have to write all the code yourself. You can just call a function in the cloud to do something. And for those of you who don't know what I mean by function is, so let's say I have to calculate the area of a circle, right? So pi r squared. So I've got to do the math to do that. Well, in the cloud, maybe there's just an area of circle function. So I just give it the information, the radius, and it spits out the area of the circle. So that's a really simplistic view of what a function is. There's really, really complex ones that data scientists can use to do linear regression, build neural nets. And so the cloud is really, really appealing for that. But you need to think about, well, if I'm going to write an application that's going to use those functions, am I now tied to that cloud because I can't replicate that function somewhere else? And then again, more importantly, is my data in the cloud? If it's not, how do I get it there? How do I ensure it's secured? How do I ensure that I have all the data governance principles that I'm required by industry and law in the cloud? Who has access in the cloud? And what do I do if I want to get rid of the data in the cloud? So again, these are all things that we have to think about. And I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. I think having that capability is really important. And so what we tend to see is organizations are going multi-cloud, but they're doing so in a very slow, methodic manner. At least the best of breed ones are. They're going slow and methodically. They're being thoughtful about the technical debt that they're potentially taking on by using native functions and that sort of thing. And they're also taking a lot of time to do the hardening to make sure that the public cloud instances are secure as on premises. And we especially see that in the financial services sector, that organizations are using the cloud essentially as infrastructure, less for the functions and more just to give them hyperscale infrastructure on demand as they need it.
Interesting. Okay. Manoj, do you want to tag in on this one?
Yeah, I think, when you think about the cloud in general, obviously, it really depends on whether you're speaking about just a public cloud or a private cloud or a mix of both, which is more like the hybrid cloud. And then how do you, where's, first of all, that data sitting, and how do you then, pull that data together? Because at the end of the day, AI needs a lot of data. And depending on where the data is coming from, whether it's from existing systems of records, there could be new data that is coming in from the edge, from Internet of Things. It could be multiple varieties of data that are coming in. At the end of the day, the question then becomes is, what is the appetite for the customer in order to run these models, whether it's in the cloud or on premise? And the good news is that at HPE, we can, offer a variety of different consumption models for our customers and really help them, try to bring that cloud-like consumption, whether it's on a premise or in a private cloud or in a hybrid cloud environment. There are tools and best practices that we have that we can engage and share with our customers on how customers can successfully run at scale production level environments for both high performance computing as well as AI. So clearly, again, it varies by customer, depends on the use case, and we can certainly assist with that.
Okay, excellent. Another question came in here. Julian is asking, could they use software-defined storage with HPE when implementing an AI infrastructure? Matt or Manoj, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at it. I think software-defined everything is going to be important here. You absolutely, if you want to get true elastic scalability, you need to separate compute from storage. So you do want some sort of software-defined storage layer, and it needs to be scale out, but potentially multi-cloud as well. So at HPE, we're pretty biased in this. We recently acquired MapR for its scale-out file system. It's essentially a software-defined storage layer that tiers the data down to object as necessary. It works across multi-cloud and an active-active. So we're kind of biased from that aspect. And then it has some native AI processing capabilities. The Blue Data software that would sit on top of MapR is also going to be used to then connect into that software-defined layer. Rather than having to copy the data around, you can spin up those ephemeral jobs using containers, using the Blue Data software to then connect into that data fabric in a read-only or read-write manner without having to copy that. But that's our software stack. I think the key here, if I take my hat off here, is that you want to be software-defined everything. You want software-defined storage, software-defined network, and then software-defined infrastructure. That's how you get the elasticity, flexibility, and ultimately the agility you need to do this at enterprise scale.
Excellent. Let's see, another question that came in here. I know we're running out of time, just a couple minutes left, but we're trying to get in as many of these as we can. Is AI primarily limited to large global enterprises? I know we had someone saying that they were in the education industry, and could AI help them? Monica, do you want to take that one?
So yeah, I think I'll make 2 points here. So the first, I think AI offers an opportunity for smaller companies and startups to really gain an edge in the market because they're nimble and they're unencumbered by legacy processes. If you just look at companies like Uber and Netflix that use innovations in technologies to really outsmart their much larger competitors and transform entire industries, AI, I believe, has the same transformative potential. So no, definitely AI is not limited to just global enterprises. But in education in particular, I think there is such a shift in learning today because information is readily available on the internet. And that wasn't true, 20 years ago when these a lot of the curriculums that we're using had been written. And so now that students have information readily available, it's less about feeding them that data and it's more about teaching them what to do with it and teaching them how to identify what's fake and what isn't fake, right? How many issues do we now have with fake news? And so in education in particular, I think there's a lot of potential for AI to build these custom curriculums and to really help students use the data and understand how to use the data that's available to them. So there's a vast amount of potential there.
Excellent. Before we go, I want to announce our gift card winner. That Amazon $300 gift card is going to Denny St. Michael of Ohio. Congratulations to Denny. And we have one last question I want to ask Manoj. Chris sent in a question and he's asking, what's the best way to get started with AI? Do you have any suggestions, Manoj?
Yeah, absolutely. I was getting ready to type a response to that. So I think from a customer perspective, clearly look at the overall objective for your organization as you're driving towards AI in terms of what is that business outcome, what is that business result that you're trying to achieve with AI, and then certainly talk to us. We can bring you the experts depending on your specific use case. We can provide you with some coaching. We have these workshops that range anywhere from half a day to a couple of days, depending on how much extensive detail you want to get into. Clearly bringing in all the stakeholders, the line of businesses, the IT department, which is absolutely critical, right? Bring the business and the IT together and to drive towards that objective and that strategy is absolutely critical. So once you have that internal objective defined, we can certainly help you with the path on what's the right way to get there. What type of an ecosystem do you need? What type of an architecture is required? And then prescribing to you what tools, what solutions you need in order to get through your pilot and maybe all the way to production. We can certainly assist you with all of that. So feel free to reach out to us and we'll reach out to us.
Excellent. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have on today's event. Before you go, I want to encourage everyone out there in the audience to download the handouts, especially that entire ebook out there that you can click and download, the Deep Learning Guide for Dummies. Also visit hpe.com/info/AI for more information on the HPE AI solution, and also intel.ai for more information on the Intel AI solution. And then finally, that email address is on the screen right there. I also put it in the chat box, AI_madeeasy@hpe.com. Thank you very much, Manoj, Matt, and Monica. A great insight into AI in the enterprise. Thank you for being on the event today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you everyone out there in our audience. Have a great day. See you next time.